what I've been trying to do with presentations is take particular themes that run through at least my collection anyway. I certainly was aware of many metals that have rather interesting architecture. So that's what this is. And beginning in the 15th century, with the probably to all of you quite well-known medals of Sigismondo Malatesta, who was the Lord of Rimini, and who issued these medals in quite large numbers, in both a large size, this one of almost 80 millimeters, and in small, much smaller ones, and who also, interestingly enough, buried these medals in some of his buildings. And also there were some that were found distributed on his, this is rather grim, on his chest in his sarcophagus. That is, they were on his body. He here asserts he was not only the Lord of Rimini, but he was a very active condottieri, which is a mercenary soldier, which was very, very common at that time and hired by other lords in the many kind of petty wars that took place in Renaissance Italy. And he's asserting here his lordship over the territory of Rimini, the city and the territory of Rimini, with the castle, his castle, as a sort of symbol of that, of his rulership and also of his power. Here he's shown also in armor. There are other versions where he's not in armor. And this is how the castle looks today. And you can see that a lot of it has disappeared, but it is a formidable structure. Another lord who also shows a rather impressive castle on his reverse is Costanzo Sforza, who was the another lord of Pesaro. And once again, he's in armor. It's very much the same model as the Malatesta, and showing his castle here. And that too still exists in a rather truncated form, as you can see, in Pesaro. We're all familiar with this particular castle, which is the Bastille in Paris. And this is a very famous medal, which is done by, I don't know whether we had a presentation on Bertrand Andrieux, maybe that was at the Numismatic Club in New York, but he was one of the leading medalists in not only the revolutionary period, but he became the official medallic portraitist for Napoleon. And he did two of these medals they're sort of in pewter, and they're of the very first incidents of the French Revolution. One is the return of the royal family from Versailles, but perhaps most dramatic, and certainly one that fits into this theme of architecture, is this view in the background of the Bastille, which is being besieged on the 14th of July, 1789. And it's a wonderful sort of rendition of that key event. Moving to Italy, and another very well-known building for those of you who have visited Florence, which I imagine is most of you. This is a view of the Medici Riccardi Palace. And the Medici Palace, of course, was built by the Renaissance Medici and existed and still exists, but it was purchased by this gentleman, Signor Riccardi, who added some portions to it. But it's another, I think, rather dramatic and quite valuable representation of that building, which really dominates Florence. Then you can have a private palace. Well, the Medici Palace was private, but this is a later view, which I thought was rather interesting. This is the Villa Kortachov, which is in which is in Sorrento, and has an interesting history, which I won't go into. But again, it's a rather, and Chapelain rather, was one of the leading French medalists, here in a plaquette, of course, but one of the leading French medalists of the 19th century. And it shows this palace was built in 1792, but it passed into the Gorchakov family in the 19th century in about 1885. And this shows it it's called the Villa Siracusa, and it's in Sorrento. But again, it's a rather, I think, attractive view of the setting of the palace, which still exists. I think it's a hotel now, actually. Returning to Italy and the Renaissance, of course, under Julius II, the original Basilica of St. Peter's, which was an early Christian basilica, was replaced with, of course, the famous dome by Michelangelo, which is not shown here. This is not his dome, but it is the design of Bramante and was done in the early 16th century. And there are several versions of this medal, but again, it's a famous building that is associated with this rather formidable Pope, Julius II, who also commissioned the Sistine. Well, no, he didn't commission the Sistine Chapel, but he had a very strong influence on all of Renaissance Italy. This is really one of my favorites, and I think one of the most beautiful architectural reverses on any medal that's ever been done. This is Anne of Austria, who was the wife of Louis XIII. And she and Louis tried desperately to have an heir, to have a son. And she made a vow that if indeed she did give birth to a male heir, that she would build a monastery or nunnery. And in fact, lo and behold, her vow was answered, and she gave birth to perhaps one of the greatest kings in history, of Louis XIV. And I think this is by Jean Warin. And I think it's also one of the most remarkable portraits, one of the most remarkable portraiture scenes in all of medallic art, showing this very tender moment where the queen is embracing her child, who's about 7 years old, I think, here. And he is sort of fondling the tassels of, it's as this kind of combination of a narrative moment and an official portrait. It's an extraordinary scene. But the facade of the church of the Val de Grâce in Paris, this is a design that was actually done by Mansard, but the real facade, which you will see in a moment, was the one that was built. But this very majestic and detailed and very beautiful architectural representation, I think, is one of the finest that has ever been done. This is a view of the entire structure, the entire monastery, with the church you can see there. The medals produced by Bianchi are not necessarily the most exciting in the world, but they're extraordinary for his perspective views, his kind of, what should we call it, the kind of deceptive or illusionistic, I guess, view of the interior of the Church of St. Paul's outside the walls, San Paolo fuori le muri. And it's an extraordinary technical achievement, I think. And therefore, I thought it was certainly worth showing as part of an architectural series on medallic art. Next, then. Not all architecture needs to be real architecture. Some of it can be allegorical, as in this case, which represents where it represents various aspects of life and death. You can see it's a temple of fame, and we associated with fame, who flies up above. This winged figure is fame, the winged figure blowing her trumpet, and also encompassing the products, I guess, that lead to fame. And here at the base of the temple, quite interestingly, we have little medals, which has led to the fame of many people, and also books. But the emphasis is also on time, which you see here. And also, we know what that is. It doesn't need to be expressed. And this is also one of my favorite pieces. This is the new town hall in Amsterdam that was built in 1655, or at least dedicated in 1655. And there are two versions of this medal. This is the one that I like best, because the reverse is an extraordinary, again, sort of allegory of the wealth and prosperity of the Dutch Republic in the Golden Age. This is a representation of the new town hall, which of course still exists. It became the Royal Palace. And here you see an enormous detail in this struck medal, the great crowd that is gathered, and the figure of Mercury, who is also the god of commerce, coming down to sort of bless the building. And on the reverse is in the background is a view of Amsterdam, sort of a view of Amsterdam. And this is the Argo, which is returning from Jason retrieving the Golden Fleece. And here, if you can see my arrow, there's Jason, and he's holding up a spear or something with a little golden fleece on it. And it reflects the prosperity and power of Golden Age, the Golden Age Dutch Republic. And at the very, very top is another little ship, which was taken from the very earliest seal of the city of Amsterdam. And then, and this also I thought was a rather impressive architecture. This is the gates of the town of Pinerolo, from which this gentleman, Henry de Melisic, came. And this shows the original sort of walled city down here with this little gate. And this was a new gate that was supposed to replace it. But I think that this artist, who was Abraham Dupré, which is another of he was a son of Guillaume Dupré, and these were among also the greatest of French medalists, had a sense of humor, because here the doors of the gate are open, and there's a little dog coming out of it for some reason. I'm not quite sure why, but it's a majestic and quite detailed, and I think very impressive architectural representation. Architecture can also be represented here symbolically as a romantic ruin, which was very popular in 18th century gardens, particularly in England. In this case, in this medal of Louis-François Lefebvre de Caumartin, who was a counselor, a keeper of the seals, and a counselor in the Paris Parliament, and a counselor of state, and therefore was an attorney and a politician. In this medal, which was commissioned by his son, it celebrates the death of the subject. And the ruin in this case, of course, is symbolic in that sense, but also in the background, one sees an image of the sarcophagus with quite logically, the scales of justice sitting on top. And that's it.
All right.
Thank you.